So I want to get kind of technical here and talk about the quality of time as it passes through the photograph as an object and what the soul or the character of the photograph acquires through the passage of time. This itself being a sort of aura or an added character which is present at the moment of time of the creation of the photograph, particularly how the artisanal method of photography functioned in the early 1900s, particularly with cabinet photography and silver gelatin photography. But what occurs in the process of the accumulation of time is and becomes the real quality of what we experience in a modern context of the photo through its process of aging and age. So this is the full embodied, almost distilled character of the object as it passes through time. It's the emulsion, the chemical emulsion of light that occurs in and through the image of itself, which gives the object its transcendental character. So when we talk about significant artifacts or works of art, uh, my main argument or my main sort of speech to that would be that the quality of the meaning of the artifact, particularly regarding a photographic object, emerges through its engagement with light and time as a passage. So we're talking about the movement of an object that interacts and reacts chemically through space time in relationship to light, in relationship to weather, in relationship to ecosystem, which again is light and shadow, heat and temperature, humidity, wetness, dampness, and dryness, and exposure to various different elemental forces and factors. So what we're really talking about is a fundamental transcendental principle, a sort of first principle or an a priori rule of all things in space and in time as bodies that are objects that weather and they weather time. Um, this is to me the utmost power and meaning of the photographic object as artifact. All of the images that I'm showing you here are from the early 1900s. Some are from Cuba, and some are from the United States of America. And what you can see, the prime differential here, is that the quality of the weather is so drastically different in terms of what these objects wear, right? The it's almost as if their character itself anticipates the futurity which they step into. The time in which they were made, or the timeliness in which they were made, was a brief present, and they step out of the present and accrue this deeper, greater meaning, not even necessarily through the space between historical phenomenon, as in the events that occur between the period of time in which this photographic event occurs, and the photograph is taken, and now, but rather through the actual embodied incarnate experience of the photographic body as it moves through space-time and thus acquires new characteristics and new traits which can't be anticipated by time or by a sort of a prophetic instinct or impulse. The object, when it is incarnated, the image is rendered, right? The photograph is developed. The capturing of light is fulminated or fomented and distilled into the image, which it is through the process of chemical rendering. But then there is the interaction with that chemical body of the image with the forces and factors multiple of time, which again we discussed is the weather, right? It's the quality of light, heat, humidity, and the forces of nature and the elements which act upon the object. This photograph here might actually be prime example. I'll tell you precisely what it is. It is a 1901 photograph of Almendares, the baseball club from Cuba. So here you're looking at an artifact of the work of time. So the artist of this photograph is the body of time. There's a human contribution in the creation of the image object, but the body of time is actually actively working on this object through the space of Cuba, through the environmental economy of Cuba. It's participating in a ritual distillation of space and time, which is the accumulation of the weather of the object. It creates the artifact as we know it today. If the preservation of this photograph were perfect and it retained the exact qualities of the period of time in which it was created, in terms of a lack of weather, it would have a vastly different character and personality. And that character and personality would be muted. It would be a behind glass sort of silencing of the work of time. And this muting would be an impulse to preserve the object from the fear of time or the fear of the encounter of time. But this object has obviously fully encountered time in terms of the weather and wear that it embodies. And as such, it actually, it shapeshifts through the mutual relationship between the humanity which creates numbers and casts this image, that relationship between the development of chemical light through the emulsion process of the photograph itself. And then furthermore, the giving of this object up to time, for time to do the work which creates the actual transcendental work of art that we experience and we witness by engaging this artifact 125 years into the future. So this object it's a primordial projection. And really what you witness and experience and engage with this object and this artifact is a passage. It's a prolonged passage of accumulation, a primordial accumulation of the nature of time that this object wears and displays through its experience of that passage. And that is the power of which the artifact presents to you first and foremost, even before you engage with and encounter the history of what's being depicted therein. The figures or the historical moments or the historical formation of the team or the where the individuals are present. So before context, right, or before meaning, before the ground, the historical ground is explored, you encounter the body of the object and have the transcendental experience of the medium of time first, which is first and foremost and becomes first and foremost the prime creator of the artifact, and that all historical objects, artifacts, and works of art, object creations, are given up fundamentally and primarily to the work of time. And the more thoroughly they are given up to receive that experience and process of time, the more thoroughly the work of art of time is created upon, within, and through them. So this is the experience of the transcendental body of time, which can only almost be experienced and resolved through the chemical emulsion of the photograph as an artifact, because what it does is it transforms the image, it transfigures the image. It's a sort of ritual chemical magic that is performed through the representation of the image, and particularly the photographic representation of the image, as it is a chemical emulsion upon photographic paper that creates and regenerates and represents the process of light capture and development, which is the early photograph, which is highly artisanal, highly hand engaged, highly photographer and developer engaged. It's a process of rendering through chemicals, these chemicals that are so explicitly liquid and fluid and light sensitive. So that light sensitivity is a chemical sensitivity to the perception of time, time fundamentally being a experience of the passage of light or intensity of light. So when we talk about space-time, what we're really talking about is a experience of relativity that's generated by the gravitational pull of star systems. So these star systems inform our everyday aperture of the experience of reality through light cones, right? Image generating light cones in the eye, the aperture of the eye, which itself informs the entire relativization of the field of experience, which we digest and metabolize through vision. The quality and power of vision is primary, particularly to the human species, in terms of symbols and signs that are used as signposts of navigating the material world. What something is perceived first and foremost by the image-centered being, or the vision-centered being. It's different for someone who does not have that faculty, a blind person, or someone whose image generating and perceiving faculty is significantly diminished. The quality of an object, or what an object appears to be, is perceived first imagistically or visually. And that's metabolized again representationally through text, right? It's a redoubling of that impulse. You perceive a tree, but then you have the word tree, which is a symbolic representation of the direct encounter of the tree itself. The power of the photograph is that it is ripped from this more solid sculptural bearing of the gelatinous form or embodied thick, viscous form of paint, which has a higher chemical stability. There's a higher density and a higher chemical stability context or content to it, as opposed to this very delicate, light-sensitive chemical emulsion process, which is affixed to the flatness of the photographic paper through the fluidity of the reproduction of light. So I hope you understand. It's the magic of photography is such that a photograph, a silver gelatin photograph generated in the early 1900s, is actually highly chemically unstable. It's highly volatile. It's a medium that can easily be taken over by light and by time, whereas a oil painting or a sculpture is not so much chemically volatile as it is materially fragile, and as such is subject to material destruction, as in fragmentation. But a photograph like this, especially affixed to a board or a mount, as a cabinet photo would be, is much more so. It's in a position of higher material stability, but much lower chemical stability. As such, the photograph is subject to significant transmutation and transformation in such a way that it can actually take on an entirely different character. and especially an entirely different character through destruction of light, right? We talked about the corrosion of light principle that was active in some of the other uh, essays where we were exploring different artifacts. Um, and that corrosion of light principle is the the absconding with uh, the incarnate form or differentiation that occurs within the photographic image, such as contrast, which is generated chemically upon the paper, right? A reproduction of the flattening of the three-dimensional body of the objects being portrayed inside the photograph, right? This is already a creation of volatility through the flattening of the three-dimensional full-bodied moment, which is being depicted through the light capture of the creation of the photograph in terms of the image capture and then rendering process chemically upon the paper. This it's already a creation of a volatile circumstance, and then what you witness is the erasure of the image through light damage or through the literal weathering or stripping of the paper, as such in this photo, which almost resembles an erasure of a glyph upon stone, and the image as such is reduced and corroded to reveal um, almost the ancient ground upon which it has been inscribed, which is like almost like the side of a mountain or a cliff. Um, and it's so in that stripping back and stripping away of the image object, what is revealed is that this paper itself has actually taken on the character of stone, in the sense of cementing and solidifying this moment into place. But yet it is chemically volatile, light sensitive stone, almost as if you're viewing through the amber of the chemically generated photographic artifact a crystallization of a historical moment which is being warped through the nature of time and thus pierces into the moment of the creation of the historical artifact itself and reveals. And what it reveals is not even necessarily the moment itself, but the fundamental essential character and nature of the being of time. So this is incredibly powerful, right? Because what the historical photograph reveals and avails us of in terms of understanding is not the moment itself. That would be a deception or a betrayal of the moment in terms of the flattening of the screen of light that is created as a projection, which is the chemically generated flattening of the three-dimensional moment into a false reality of the image. What it is revealing to us is that through the falsity and projection of this chemically volatile image, through the emulsion of light and the experience of this chemically generated, warped, transfigured movement of time, we can actually perceive the art of time, and as such perceive in a reflectory or refractory way, we actually perceive the character and essence of time itself. Um, because time itself becomes the artist of this image because it's been left to chemical light volatility. So you can really observe the essence of the being of time. And as such, it's almost like you're let in on this transcendental secret in terms of the nature of the weather through the chemical photographic technology. So this is it's an incredibly powerful experience, I think, looking at these historical photographs, because each of them develops a different character based on the ecosystem, as in space and place and time and the volatility of the weather, which in itself is the communication of the fragility and how much time has been allowed to enter in and claim and sort of wrap its claws around the image and thus distort it to reveal itself, the true character of being, right? Um, and that's why I think in particular the Cuban photographs are so profound, is that a lot of the time there was no there was no significant preservation that occurred. Whether or not there was an attempt to preserve, um, these photographs are very clearly, they have been left to the destructive force of time, and that time has worked upon them, and time has been allowed to work upon them because of the political, environmental, economic, social, and cultural circumstances that occurred between the very early 1900s in Cuba and a modern day context, which is 125 years into the future. The allowance of this work of time is actually what is appropriate, what is true, and what is real, because it allows us to engage with the transcendental artistry, the chemical force and power of transfiguration and transmutation, which is the artistry and creativity of the universe itself as a light body, right? As a interstellar chemical light body which transfigures and transfuses elemental projections, which form images, which form materializations of different figures and species, so on and so forth. It actually is an entryway and a gateway into the transcendental metaphysics of nature itself, which is the light language of genetics, the light language of chemical formations and structures and compounds, which then scale, right? It's the scaling of the cellular architecture of being itself through the nutrients, through the ecosystem of nutrients, all of which are sort of different compositions of light elementally, again through carbon or through different structural forms, hydrogen, which create uh, fixed material bodies, quote unquote, so to speak. So you're led into that language through the presentation, through almost the offering of the sacrifice of the votive photograph to time. And to do this work of time, it is the transcendental movement that transcends time and place in history through active engagement with time and place in history. It's the votive sacrifice of the photographic object to the chemical powers of time, which then itself creates, regenerates, and rebirths a historical artifact and object, which is absolutely and utterly transcendental, because it reveals the essence and nature of time through, in, and as the artifact itself, which then is claimed by time as primary author. So you can see, obviously, the original photographic artifact, but then furthermore, what you are given is you are given the nature and character and essence of time, the signature of time, as the redoubled and profound reconfiguration of the photographic art object through the paintbrush of time, the work of time, which is a work of the chemical paintbrush upon the stone, which is the regenerative impulse of light and the environment of light and heat and humidity, the ecosystem which reconfigures and transfigures the object into something that has profound existential power, that otherwise, if it were perfectly preserved and hidden away from time, in a lockbox, so to speak, it would not have the ability to develop the exposure, which is the revelation of this sort of hidden secret key of the universe, which is then presented to us in a material, imagistic, and visual way, which is a translation in our ability to have a direct encounter with the sort of most profound and sacral movement, which otherwise occurs imperceptibly in a glacial way, right? 125 years into the future, you're given this revelation of 125 years of the work of cosmic ecosystemic light and heat upon a physical material body, which is chemically volatile and thus allows for the transfiguration of the image, for the lock of the image to be turned and reveal the existential, essential breath of the universe. And so this early chemical silver gelatin photography is a sort of votive sacrifice to time, whether or not that was known in the moment in terms of that technology. But this was a highly revolutionary technology in terms of being able to render accurate historical images. So then what you're doing is these images themselves are not necessarily interpretive, other than through the subjective lens through which they are generated. That's not necessarily an interpretive impulse as such as you would commonly see in art. These are direct documentary historical photographs. But in doing so, right, in that allowance of that social realistic history to emerge through the image generating technology of the photograph, you are centering, right, again, unconsciously, especially in Cuba, through the work of the uh, ecosystemic, environmental, um, economic, political instability, which is the climate of Cuba as a nation and as a region in space and time in the 1900s. You're allowing for the art of time to take the fore, and as such, allow for the richness of the historical content and context of the object to remain and to be present and to uh, ground the object in the material center of its origin and of its meaning, but then to gain this existentially transcendental layer, which is the revelation of universal time, transcendental time, eternal time, through the rooting of this material ground of the object in space time and in its particular context. The Cuban photography, in particular, is such a rich example of this, precisely for the reasons just stated. So we're hitting it there. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you on the next one.